Hey everyone, we're back again for another episode of Lessons of the Woods. I have with me, I have two guys, but I'll introduce myself first. I will be your host tonight, Dylan Porter. With me I have our co-host, Kyle Weber, and special guest, my dad, Steve Porter of Steve Porter's Trophy Whitetails. Former law enforcement, almost 28 years, 30
29
years?
and a half.
29 and a half years of law enforcement. And we're going to go a little bit off the hunting trail today. We're going to talk about law enforcement questions that we may have. So with that, Kyle, go right ahead. What do you got for Dad?
Oh man, put me on the hot seat first.
I'm putting you on the hot seat first because we exhausted CWD last episode. We could probably find more there if we wanted to, but we're gonna try something a little bit different. Go off the normal path that we're on. So.
Well, I'm gonna kick off with a video that Steve did last year or the year before. Don't recall. But it was a DNR warden entering a fish house, which I think was the fish house you were in, Steve. I think you were filming it.
Right. Right.
But what was the argument with that? What was the conversation?
Sure. And so just for people listening, I have 29 and a half years in law enforcement, and I know the law pretty well. I've done a lot of major investigations, and so where do our rights start? Where do they stop? And I see a common pattern of the Minnesota DNR beating to their own drum and not following the rules of criminal procedure. Rules of criminal procedure are rules that a licensed officer, peace officer, licensed officer must follow, and they just have to, okay? And there's a chronological order on what you can and cannot do, and it's real simple. So we were out fishing, and I'll make this real quick. A fish house was determined back in the early 2000s. There was a Supreme Court case, and I could find it and quote it, that said that a fish house, the courts have ruled that you have a reasonable expectation of privacy and that officers can't just barge in to a fish house. Now, there's all sorts of misinformation out there. People say you can't lock your fish house, and people understand when I'm talking about law now, I'm not talking about Iowa, I'm not talking about Wisconsin, I'm talking about Minnesota. And then the game wardens had a habit of wanting to just open the door, hope to catch you with too many lines or eating a fish or doing something, and I got you, you're in plain view. But the courts have ruled that, hey, they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Well, what would be a reasonable expectation of privacy? Could you have a woman in your fish house, maybe your wife, and she's got to go to the bathroom, and you're in a 5x5 fish house, and she decides to pee in a 5-gallon pail? Would that be appropriate for a game warden to come barging in if she's peeing out in the middle of the lake in a 5-gallon pail? Not really appropriate. So the courts have ruled you can't go in. So then an order went out once this happened, and it's interesting, and Dylan, you could pull it up off our website, and you could show it on there where people could find it. I put a link on our website. It's called Know Your Rights. And so it was a colonel of the DNR, Windhelm, I think was his name. He issued marching orders to all the game wardens in the state, and he said, hey, we have to operate differently. But he kind of lied a little bit, because what he said in the beginning of his letter, which Dylan's going to pull up, and you can find it on Porter Whitetail.
I'm actually not right now. That page of your website is corrupted. I had to go through and rebuild most of your website, and I didn't make it to that page, so that is not up right now.
So it'll come up. But on the beginning of that, he says he tells all the game wardens that, hey, don't barge in, and this is how we're going to operate, and this is what you're going to do. Dylan will have it fixed on our website soon enough. But what he did is he said, hey, everybody, the way we do business is no longer legal. Well, that sounds fine, but guess what? The Constitution hasn't changed. So the way you do business is no longer legal? That's actually misrepresentation of the truth. I'm going to call it a lie, because you were never doing it legal. The Constitution always said it was wrong for you to barge in on people. You were doing it, got caught, and now you said, well, the law changed, we can't barge in. No. The Constitution's the same today and forever. It's an unchanging document, okay? So you can't barge into fish houses. So what? There's so much that we could talk about, okay? There is something that people get confused on. It's called an open field doctrine. So Dylan, people have asked in Minnesota, can a game warden come on my land? I got a food plot and I'm out there hunting. Can he come on my land and just walk around and come and check me?
That's actually what I was going to ask you next, because that's what I've heard a lot of people say. You know, I'm out in my tree stand and suddenly there's a game warden walking across my field in his prime hunting hours. Is that legal and allowed?
Right. And people, again, I'm giving you my best advice. If you have actual questions and you're really concerned, you might want to call an attorney, but this is my strong opinion from my years of law enforcement, okay? Open field doctrine. So that gives an officer a right to be a little more liberal in going out and looking and seeing and discovering crime. And you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your open field, but you do have a reasonable expectation of privacy around your house, in your buildings, in your car, in certain, that's a little different, but around the curtilage of your property. So what would be the curtilage? If you had a 4-foot picket fence around your house, you could say that's your curtilage. You mow it, you maintain it, you trim the bushes, and a game warden wants to come through your 4-foot picket fence, and he wants to come up and look inside a toolbox that's sitting outside your garage. Is that a legal search? Not legal, okay? So the courts have ruled the plain view doctrine. Okay, this is confusing and people's eyes will gloss over, but just stay with me on this, okay? If you have a legal right to stand where you're standing as an officer, anything in plain view is fair game. Okay? So we got this 4-foot picket fence around your curtilage of your house. And somebody tells me as an officer, hey, so-and-so's got a grow operation. They're growing marijuana in there, and you need to go bust them. But I don't want to give my name, and I'm not signing, and we're not getting involved in a search warrant. But you need to bust them. Well, I believe the guy's growing pot. I believe he is. Can I go get a warrant? The guy doesn't want to get involved in a warrant. So I want to snoop, let's say. And I go up to this picket fence, and I reach over the top of the 4-foot fence, and there's a little thumb hook, and I pull it, and I walk down the sidewalk. I know the guy's at work, and I go knock on his door. I know he's not home. Knock, knock, knock. I'm standing on a step, and I look between the window and the shade, and I see a marijuana leaf. I know what a marijuana leaf is. I'm going to go back and try to get a warrant. Is that a righteous or just plain view doctrine? Can I write that down and say, hey, I was there, I saw it. It's good to go. It's not. It's fruit of the poisonous tree. Do you know why? Fruit of the poisonous tree is evidence that cannot be used in court. It's inadmissible. It gets kicked out of court. Why? Because that guy, I did not have a legal right to stand where I was standing when I observed the marijuana leaf sticking out behind the curtain. Okay, are you with me? So I went and lifted his thumb latch, his little hook, and I walked beyond his privacy fence. Everything after that point is illegal in plain view. Anything I discover, it's illegal, okay? So, new scenario. Guy comes up to me and says, hey, so-and-so's growing marijuana, and I believe he is, and I know he's at work, and I want to go do a search, but I can't go do a search because I know it's going to be inadmissible. And I just sit on the information, and a week goes by, and the guy is all of a sudden getting divorced. And divorce papers come into my office, and I have to serve the guy divorce papers. And I know the guy's probably at work. I go to the same picket fence. I have the divorce papers. I open the gate. I'm going to go do a legal service on the guy with papers. Now I'm standing on his steps, and I see the same marijuana leaf. But I have a legal right to stand on the steps because I'm trying to knock on the door to serve him his divorce papers. I can go back and write a search warrant and say, hey, I was attempting a paper service. I went and knocked on his door, saw the marijuana. It's all plain view. It's all righteous. It all goes into court. It's a righteous bust. Very long explanation. Kyle, does it make sense?
Yep. I actually had a situation, years ago now. Long story short, I had a warden park on the road, so I actually had I wasn't on the corner lot, but I was one property off the corner lot, so I had a road to my east and then a road that turned and went straight above my north. Anyways, I'm in my house and I see a warden park on the road and walk up my driveway. She's walking up my driveway. I walk out on the porch, walk down my steps. I get kind of where my driveway ends, and I asked what she was doing. And she said she got a report that I was overbaiting or feeding deer. Because in the state of Wisconsin, we can only feed or bait 2 gallons. I said, well, and she goes, I want to inspect it. And I said, you don't have permission to be on my property. And I told her to get off. And I said it in not as many nice words as this, but I told her to get off my property. And she goes, well, I need to look at it. I said, well, you can drive down and down that road, and you can look across their yard and look back there. And it was a feeder that you can't see inside it. So, you know, like if it was full of corn or if there was 2 kernels there, you couldn't tell the difference. But I was like, get off. You can't be here. I'm not letting you be here. I'm not giving you permission to be here. And if you want to check my feeder, go drive down the road and look across their yard and then look across my yard and maybe have a plain view of what's going on. Was I right or was I wrong?
So a lot of people are going to say, well, we're watching this video podcast, and if you got nothing to hide, why are you being a prick? That's a common response that people come with. You got nothing to hide, just do it. Here's my response. If you look at my family tree, if you look at Kyle Weber or Dillan's family tree, you know what you're going to see in your family tree? Somewhere in your family tree there was a patriot. And that patriot fought in a war. And he died on American soil to guarantee you your constitutional right. You have a forefather in your family tree somewhere, maybe 2, maybe 5, and they lost their life at 18 years old in a battle to guarantee us our U.S. constitutional rights. And if we're going to just forfeit our rights because we have nothing to hide, he kind of died in vain. So to me, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, and it didn't expire when I got out of law enforcement. I still have an oath to uphold the Constitution, and just because you choose to exercise your rights doesn't make you a bad guy. So the argument of, well, if you got nothing to hide, just let him in, it doesn't hold water, okay? I have rights. I don't want you in my fish house. Go get a search warrant. Especially when you've got an agency that is known to be overzealous, hyper overzealous, in violating your rights just so they can hang a ticket on you. Okay? So, Kyle, you didn't do anything wrong because there's a formula for how they got to get to where they get. So, Kyle, when I arrested a sex offender and he'd molested a young girl, I'd probably arrested 50 of them. The question is, if I go to that sex offender, Kyle, if he molests a young girl, do you want me to arrest him?
Yep.
Do you want him to go to jail?
Yep.
Do you want him to get off on a technicality?
No.
You want me to do it right. It's important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do the ends justify the means? Meaning, well, he's a slime ball, so I'm going to just kind of push it a little bit further and not do it quite right? No, it doesn't mean that. When I go up to a sex offender and I say, hey, I got a complaint that you did this, that, or the other thing, I have to protect his constitutional rights throughout the entire investigation, so any evidence that I gather is not fruit of the poisonous tree. It's admissible, righteous in court, and it can be used to convict the guy. So when I go talk to a sex offender and I say, hey, I want to talk to you, and he says, yeah, what about? Well, you know, I got a complaint, and I got to read you the Miranda warning. You have the right to remain silent, and then you say, can and will be used against your court of law. Yeah, I probably want to talk to an attorney. Well, no, you're a sex offender, so I'm not going to give you that right. You're going to talk to me, by God. I can't do that. I say, oh, perfect. I kind of knew you'd lawyer up, and so that means you're not going to let me search your house. No, you're not searching anything. Well, I brought a search warrant with. I knew you'd say that. Now I'm going to place you in custody, and I'm going to let you sit here. Officer, watch him, and we're taking your computer. And she said that there was evidence hidden in your bedroom that facilitated the crime. We're searching your bedroom. Everything's righteous, right? I have to protect his rights throughout the case.
To see it through.
To see it through. But the game wardens are like, well, we don't care about your rights because we're here and we're going to write a misdemeanor ticket and we're going to get you a $180 fine. And so
you're going to pay it, not ask questions.
And then the game wardens get sloppy. So let me explain this. A new deputy on the force, a year into his job, when you're on trial, the attorneys rip you up one side and down the other. And a new deputy, iron sharpens iron. When you're on the witness stand, the new deputy becomes sharp because the defense attorney's ripping him and cross-examining. And when that young deputy gets off the stand, you know what he says? Man, I learned a lot about the law today. But if you're a game warden and all you ever do is write tickets for $180 that are payable, you become more and more sloppy, Nobody ever challenges it. They don't want to miss a day of work. You're not writing big felonies. So you become more and more hyper aggressive. They ain't going to challenge it. If I do, we lose it in court, whatever. It doesn't matter. And the game warden, 30 years later, really hasn't spent any time on the witness stand. He's not sharp. He's just hyper aggressive. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So the plain view doctrine, do you know what that is? The plain view doctrine, if it's in plain view, it's righteous. But it's only righteous evidence if you have a right to be standing where you're standing when you observe the illegal behavior. Are you with me?
Yep.
Okay, could they fly a drone over your property and look for 3 gallons of corn instead of 2? And I'm guessing in Wisconsin, but it's this way in Minnesota. There's no baiting. But could they fly a drone over your property?
I would hope not.
But they can.
I mean,
They can. They can fly right over your property and there's nothing you can do about it. You have no legal expectation of privacy from the sky. Okay? Okay? All right. So if you are in your house and you're making a meth lab and you set your garbage outside your front door and you got a bag there, and in that bag is evidence of a crime of a manufacturing meth. And an officer comes up, you got the 4-foot picket fence, and he lifts that little latch and he walks up and steals your garbage and takes it back to the office and looks through it and finds all the elements for a meth lab. Is that righteous evidence?
no.
Why?
Because he lifted the gate. He opened the gate.
He entered the curtilage.
Yeah.
The next day, the guy takes the bag off the steps and he goes and sets it on the curb beyond the fence. Can the officer take it now?
Yep.
He can take that because you threw it away. And then he can go get a warrant based on what he found. And he finds a bill in the garbage that says Kyle Weber, Cable, Wisconsin. Then he finds batteries and chemicals and tubing and all the components of a meth lab. And he knows it's your residence because he found a bill with your name on it. And he gets a search warrant and he goes in and busts you for intent or manufacturing methamphetamine. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so back to the DNR. What would be a scenario, you guys, that would be a good question? And people listening, I've encouraged Dillan and Kyle I want their podcast to develop into a scenario where callers can call in. And I would like to be involved in that. And I'd love to be saying we're going live and we can take questions because there's so many fine questions. And since the DNR doesn't want to talk to me, they could have imposters call and challenge me and rip my butt on anything, and I'm willing to take any phone call and try to defend it, because the game wardens won't talk to me, but they could have their buddy call and ask a hard question. Good, let's do that, okay? You see what I'm saying? So I would like to get where we're fielding questions and telephone calls, and we're doing it that way. So another tactic in Minnesota, you guys. Game warden's driving down the road. He meets a farmer in a pickup wearing a blaze orange coat. And he puts his hand out the window and says, "Stop. Just stop." And the farmer wearing an orange coat, he pulls over. The game warden gets out. And he says, I see you've got a rifle on the seat. And your case is open. Back in the day when it had to be cased. Now it's a little different. But let's say it's back in the day. I'm writing you a ticket for uncased firearm. Well, he saw it in plain view, didn't he? He did. But was it a righteous stop? It wasn't even a righteous stop. But he didn't turn his red lights on because he didn't have probable cause. He had no reason to stop the guy. But the game wardens hang their hat and they say, well, if you're wearing orange, you're in the act of hunting. I have a right to inspect your gun, your license, and your game. That's a fact. So Kyle, if you're walking across a field, Dylan, you got a rifle, the game warden pulls up and you're walking out in a field with a rifle and you got blaze orange on, can he assume you're hunting?
I guess, yeah.
He can. And he walks up to you and he says, how's deer hunting going today? And you say, well, it kind of sucks. Guess what you just did? You admitted you're hunting deer.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
So could you be walking out in the field with your blaze orange coat on to put a cow down that has hoof rot?
Yep. It's deer season, you probably should be wearing orange, you know.
Right.
Just
So
to be safe.
my point is the fact of wearing orange does not constitute that you're hunting.
No.
The fact of carrying a rifle does not constitute that you're hunting. The fact that you're driving down the road wearing orange doesn't constitute you're hunting, but the game warden says, hey, you're wearing orange? You're fair game. I get to put my hand out the window and stop you. My challenge to everybody is, if you're driving down the road and a game warden sticks his hand out the window and flags you down to stop, I'm not stopping. I'm going to keep on going. They've even swerved in the front of people and hit their brakes and caused them to lock up their brakes. They've actually created a traffic hazard by swerving in front of the people. That's happening. I'm getting those reports. So here we've got overzealous officers. I got to write tickets, and it's just ridiculous. So if it's an unconstitutional stop, but you willingly stop, you're kind of getting in trouble. I mean, you shouldn't have stopped. You just keep going. And I've had people I've talked to, and they said, Steve, he does this to me every year. And I said, well, just keep driving. And now they kept driving. They said, he don't even turn around. He just keeps on going because he doesn't have a legal right to stop you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had a young kid that listened to me. He was about a neighbor kid. He was about 13 years old after the fish house incident. And he heard me talking to some adults. And I said, you don't have to let a game warden in your fish house. And so a year goes by, and this young kid goes with an 18-year-old boy, and they go up to Lake of the Woods fishing. Game warden pulls up on a snowcat. They're in a little tent that's about 4.5 feet tall. It's a little ice-up, pop-up tent. Game warden walks up to the tent, and he says, Game warden, can I come in? And this little 14-year-old boy had heard me talking. And he wasn't being a smart aleck. He has nothing to hide, but he has constitutional rights. And game warden says, hey, can I come in? And the 14-year-old boy says, nobody home. That's funny. Guess what the game warden did? Went
Busted
back
in the door.
No, went and got on his four-wheeler and drove away. Got on his snowcat and drove away because he knew that he had been denied consent. A 14-year-old boy turned him around. Now, I'm going to have people saying, and if we did this live and I could take phone calls, I'd love to field the questions. The first question that would come in would be, well, Steve, you're promoting people sitting in a house and cleaning out all the walleyes and cooking them up, and you're causing problems and you're not protecting the resource. Wait a minute. You've been sitting at home. There's been sex offenders going to court in your town, and you've never went up to the courtroom. You've never sat in there with a t-shirt that says hang 'em high. You've never written letters to protect the kids in your community. But now all of a sudden, when we have rights in a fish house, you're like, well, we got to protect the fish. I tell you what, grow up, get a cause, go to your courthouse, ask for a next sex offender going on trial, get matching t-shirts with about 4 of your friends. It happens weekly. And go up there and demand that the judge puts a good sentence out on these sex offenders. Just demand it. But as far as people sitting in their fish house, yep, the game warden has rules to follow. You can't barge in. Other states are different. I'm talking about Minnesota. You can't barge in. And if you don't want the game warden coming in, don't let him in. But if you're standing outside, you're in your fish house, let's say, okay? And you got a tip-up out on the ice. And you're watching out the window a tip-up. And you're fishing inside, and you got several guys, but somebody wants to do a northern tip-up out on the ice. And there's foot tracks going back and forth, and it was just snowing. Someone's going out and baiting that tip-up. And the game warden walks up. He has a legal right to stand there. He sees the tip-up. What has he learned? Somebody's in the act of fishing. That's a fact. And now that if he talks to that person and they come out to check the tip-up, what are they obligated to do? They have to show them their fishing license. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Do they have to let him inside the fish house?
No.
Nope. But the law says you got to show them your license and your game or fish.
Fish can be taken outside of a fish house.
Right. You see what I'm saying? I don't want people to get in trouble, but you have a right to ask a game warden, do I have to let you in the fish house? Just ask a question. And he'll say, no, you don't have to let me in, but I'm going to see your fish. And then if you want to exercise your rights because of your forefathers dying to get us these rights, you could yell in the fish house and say, hey, put all the fish in a bucket if we have any and hand them out the door. I don't want you inside. And there's
that narrative of I don't answer questions. Like we talked about the gentleman, blaze orange rifle walking across the field. Hey, how's hunting? I don't answer questions. Then you're not admitting to hunting or fishing. Obviously, if the warden sees somebody walking out to a tip-up, pulling a fish up and taking it back in, he's got...
Right.
He understands that the act of fishing is happening.
Right.
But we could go grab an ice shack, go set it up on the lake, and we could just go hang out. Do a podcast.
You can take your wife out there for a Valentine's Day supper on the fish house and have her
Yep.
roses and wine. It doesn't mean you're fishing.
Yep.
Right? But the point is, you have the right to remain silent. However, you don't want to obstruct them from doing their job to the point of, hey, I'm fishing or hunting. I'm not showing you my license. I'm not showing you my gun. I'm not showing you my game. They can write you a ticket for that. If they can articulate that you are in fact hunting,
And obstructing.
then you must comply. Show them your license. Show them your game. Show them your gun. Let them look at it. Okay? But Ben harassed an old guy over here in Roseau County, Ben Huner, and his report said when I did a data request that I saw across the field it was either a pickup or a deer stand. And if it was a deer stand, I knew by the time of day if it was occupied. If it was occupied, they were hunting after legal shooting hours. So I drove across the field and I yelled out to the tree hut, and the guy said, "Go away." So I knew he was hunting after hours. Is there anything wrong with that, you guys?
There's no way to verify that. I mean, you can sit in a tree stand. That doesn't mean you're hunting after hours. You can sit in a tree stand 24/7. People sleep in them.
I've actively sat in a tree stand after shooting hours for the deer to leave.
Right.
I mean, not an hour, but I've actually sat there in the dark just waiting for the deer to leave before I exited.
Right. So
Doesn't mean I was hunting.
Right. So, doesn't mean you were hunting. So hunting constitutes pursuing game, releasing an arrow, firing a shot, or actively pursuing game. But can I go to my box stand and could I spend the night in my box stand so I don't have to walk out in the morning and scare all the deer off the field?
Mm-hmm.
So if I can spend the night in my stand, Ben on his face is lying. He's lying when he says if it's occupied, the guy's hunting too late. He's got a huge assumption there because you can spend the night in your deer stand.
So to back up that story though, before we get too far off, is it okay for Ben to go across the field when he thinks he may see a deer stand? Is that passing the curtilage of where he can legally stand?
Right. So there is no curtilage. He's in an open field. And so if a game warden would say, I saw a guy in orange, I heard a shot, I saw a flash out his barrel, I knew it was after hours, I drove out there. That's fine, it's legal. There is no curtilage because it's an open field. He has more liberty with an open field. If he sees a guy in orange, he probably has a right, we could argue, to go out there and say, let me see your gun, let me see your game, let me see your license. However, in the fall of the year, we get frost. It's an alfalfa field. Does a game warden have a right to drive across your alfalfa? And anytime you drive on freezing alfalfa, you kill the alfalfa. And there's 2 tire tracks for a half mile across a fresh alfalfa field that are all dead alfalfa that won't grow next year. Does a game warden have a right to cause you financial damage in your farming or agricultural pursuit to inspect you on a whim?
Based on a huge assumption of what you're doing.
Right. So my argument is no, he doesn't have a right to damage what you've got going on there. And so they say they do. I would say, hey, you know what? You got no business being out here. Get off my property. And I just don't like people being overzealous. You know what I mean? Now, is a game warden's job important? Sure. I probably arrested more people for DNR violations in Kitson County when I was a deputy than probably any local game warden ever did.
But there's a difference between you can see stuff and just being a jerk. Why can't you wait for the farmer for the assumed hunter to leave the property instead of damaging their crops? Yeah, even if you claim to have a right to be there as a DNR officer, why are you being a jerk?
Correct. And so the open field doctrine gives them more liberty. You guys understand that now. They do have more liberty. If they can articulate that you're in the act of hunting, they have a right to talk to you. Okay? So, but here's a hypothetical question, okay? And I got to look these bond amounts up, the ticket amounts. So people get tickets for hunting over bait in Minnesota. I think it's ridiculous, the baiting law in Minnesota. I think it's absolutely ridiculous because you can bait in North Dakota, Canada, Iowa, Wisconsin. I think you can bait in the 4 directions all the way around us, okay? But if you get caught baiting in Minnesota, what they're doing is they're enforcing what they think is morality. Now they say, oh, we're spreading CWD, but it's been this way forever. If you get caught baiting, you can't hunt for 3 years, and you potentially lose your gun.
If you shot it... Here's what the statutes say or the DNR handbook says. Penalties for baiting violations, page 62 of the synopsis for 2022. A person may not obtain a deer license if you get caught baiting. A person may not obtain any deer license or take deer under a lifetime license for 1 year after the person is convicted with aid or use of bait. A second conviction within 3 years result in a 3-year revocation. The revocation period doubles if the conviction is for a deer that is a trophy deer scoring higher than 170. So they're even saying if you shoot a bigger deer, you're a worse person, and it's a bigger fine than if you shoot a small deer, which all deer should be equal.
So potentially you got to pay restitution for a deer, more restitution for a trophy. Possibly you're going to lose your rights, and you're going to lose your firearm.
Yep, firearms and bows used to take deer with the aid or use of bait will be seized and are subject to confiscation upon conviction. So, also, wasn't there a case that we heard about where a guy loaded the deer into the back of his pickup, and his pickup was confiscated as well because it aided in him taking the deer off the property? So
I think it can be. So here's my point. Okay, would a person? I'm just asking, okay? What would the fine be for hunting without a license? What if you went out there and didn't even have a license and you shot a deer? I would bet you money it's probably less of a fine and less of a penalty to hunt without a license than it is to shoot a deer over bait.
And if you don't have a license, you're not agreeing to the rules set forth by the DNR, right?
Well, if you were out there hunting...
Up to $500 misdemeanor offense.
Up to $500 for hunting without a license?
Yep.
Yeah, so you see what I'm saying? So the baiting has been so embellished to be so evil and so bad. It's just a terrible deal. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just a messed up deal. But what authority do they have if we stay on task with that? They can't put their hand out the window and stop you and flag you down. They got to turn on their red lights and siren. Now, am I telling everybody? Game warden puts his hand up. Some people argue that, well, you know, if it's following a signal. Well, if you say, oh, I knew he wanted me to stop and I didn't stop, well, you shouldn't do that. But I'm just saying it's following a signal that you understand, and the universal signal is red lights and siren. It's not a point, wink, wink, hand wave out the window. Can they come on your fields? I think they can come on your field if they see you hunting. Can they just walk across because they're curious? Man, I'd be pissed. I mean, I would be to the point where I'm escorting them off my property. You come out here, I got food plots, you're walking around a half hour after sunup, opening morning, chasing all my bucks off my property. I've been a year waiting for opening morning, and here you all walking around on my property. We don't do that, okay? So
and that's where it boils down to don't be a jerk.
Right. So years ago, the DNR they were made to look so stupid because they can't read the law. When you read the DNR law, you have to pretend you're reading it with like a 5th grade reading level and no more. You have to read exactly what it says, okay? So listen to this. The law said that you cannot shoot at a big game animal from or across or over a maintained roadway, okay? So the DNR went out and bought big deer decoys with remote heads. And it was the first year they ever did it. It might have been 15 years ago, okay? Maybe 20. And they put these decoys out, and game wardens sat on them. They had policies implementing everything. And the game wardens went out, and people would drive by, and I don't think people should be shooting from the road. They don't know where there's somebody in the woods. I mean, it's a dangerous practice. But nonetheless, we have to enforce the law and the intent of the law. Do I want people shooting from the road? No. But we got to arrest people properly. So they put the decoys out. They had to get permission from the landowner. And then the landowner would say yes, the decoy's sitting there, and the guy drives by and shoots from the road. And then they jump out at him and say, aha, you were shooting at a big game animal from the road, and I'm writing you a ticket, and you're in big trouble. The guy would apologize, get his ticket, and go to court. The judge, they threw out every ticket that fall. Every ticket got dismissed, as far as I know. Because the statute says you cannot shoot at a big game animal from or across a maintained roadway. So maintained means they put gravel on it, they tar the roads, they fix things up, they push snow off it, right? So that's a maintained roadway. So could we shoot at a big game animal from a non-maintained roadway? That's an argument. What if it's a minimum maintenance road that's never had gravel? They let the snow build up, and could you shoot it over or across that one? I would argue that you could. But in this particular case, the law said add a big game animal, and these were decoys. So they had to dismiss him because the guy didn't shoot at a deer. He shot at a piece of foam from the road. So they dismissed him. So then the DNR came back to the legislative session and they had to add, and if you look it up today, it says that you can't shoot at a big game animal or a big game decoy. And now they can get convictions. So what a silly agency to not even understand the law that they were enforcing. What a waste of manpower to not realize this isn't going to be any good. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Constantly making mistakes. And like I said, a first-year deputy who's on trial, testifying in court, he's sharper, usually, than a 20, 30-year game warden who's been writing payable offenses. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So when the law says you cannot shoot at a big game animal or a big game decoy from or across a maintained roadway, the question is, in Minnesota, can you shoot at a rough grouse from the road?
It's not a big game animal or a big game decoy.
So they have an exception. You could look it up and you could find it, Dylan. And it says in there something about you have to be so many feet from your vehicle when you do it. So if you have a shotgun, you got to be so many feet from your vehicle, but it doesn't say so many feet removed from the highway. It wants a distance from your vehicle. So if you're driving down the gravel road and you own the land and you see a grouse sitting in a branch, they probably want you to walk 50, 60, 70 feet from your vehicle, maybe on the shoulder of the road. And then you can shoot it. Does that make sense? So the question, can you shoot at a grouse from the road? If you can find it, Bill,
Based on that.
I think you can. So, can you shoot at a coyote from the road?
As long as you're so far away from your vehicle, because it's not a big
They
game
did,
animal.
but they didn't put the exception in the law about so many feet for a coyote. They only put it in there for the birds.
So that means legally, because you shoot it from your vehicle?
Well, from your vehicle, no.
A foot on the ground.
You can. So I asked the warden coming in our office one day. I said, "Can you shoot at a coyote from the road?" And he said, "Well, we don't want people to know this." But again, they're not following legislative intent. But you can shoot at a coyote from the road, but not from your motor vehicle. Are you with me?
So you can step out of it.
Unless something's changed, and I advise people to look. I've been retired for a few years now, but that's the way it was. And read the law, and read exactly what it says. Okay. And this is why it'd be fun to have, because if Dylan was a little quicker at looking these laws up here.
Well, just cheapers.
Yeah.
So I
hold
got
on,
a scenario for you, Steve.
Yep.
In Minnesota, you can feed, but you can't bait. So let's just say somebody has 100 acres that's heavily wooded. Up there, it gets really thick, especially up in Kitson County. Does a warden ever have a legal right to walk onto your property to inspect your baiting or your feeding sites? So baiting's illegal.
Yep.
So if it's during hunting season, do they ever have legal right to walk onto your 100 acres and see if you're baiting? It's not inside of the road. You can't see it.
Right. I'm gonna say they don't, but they're gonna say they do. And they're going to challenge you in court on that deal, and then you're going to have to go into court, and a judge is going to have to make a decision. So under the trespass laws, under the 609 code, it says, whoever refuses to leave upon being told to do so is guilty of trespass, okay? So if Kyle, if you came to my farm, and I said, Kyle, I really don't want you here, you got to leave my yard, and you refuse to do so, I get to have you charged with the 609 trespass law. You refuse to leave upon being told to do so. But if you came in my yard and I said, Kyle, I don't want you here, you need to leave, and you turn around and drive out, and I said, Kyle, never again, don't come in my yard. But a week later, you come back in my yard, I met the requirement because I've already informed you I don't want you there, and then you came back.
You don't have to verbalize that again.
Right. I don't have to do it again. You came back, you're guilty of trespass. So I pulled up to a local warden one day, and I said, I just got to tell you, and I was mad. And I was more acting than anything because they're just trying to destroy my farm. So a lot of the rants I do on Facebook, I am mad. I don't want to lose my farm, but I can have fun with it, right?
Yeah.
And so I told the game warden, I said, hey, every time I see a game warden uniform, I just get pissed. I'm just mad. I said, it's a corrupt agency. Get a real job. Go work for customs. Go work for ICE. Get a job where you're going after sex offenders. You're trying to catch somebody in 30 years with an extra walleye. Get a job that matters. And I'm having fun. But I said, I just want to tell you, make an ICR, initial complaint report, that I pulled you over today and I spoke to you, and I have officially informed you that I don't ever want a game warden on my property. Ever. You write it down, you make an ICR that I told you today there will never be a game warden on my property. Okay, so did I satisfy the requirements on that date of informing the DNR I don't want him on my property according to the 609 code? Don't want you on my property, don't come on my property. It's an interesting argument. I don't know if it would fly, but it is an interesting argument. So if a husband and wife, not a husband and wife, but let's say people are having a problem and I don't want that guy on my land, I would tell people, hey, under the 609 code, I got to tell you to leave. If you come back, you're getting a ticket. And I would make an official report. I would document it. Joe Blow's not allowed on there. And I'd tell them, if you come back, you've already had your first warning, you're going to be charged the next time around. And it flew. It stood up in court.
I got a list of people I could just file all the names and just
Right.
just cover some ground with.
I don't. But Wisconsin might be different. You know what I mean? You got to check the law.
So well, purely hypothetical.
I can't find nothing
as
about shooting from roads.
So say that again, Kyle.
Just purely hypotheticals. Say Minnesota and Wisconsin are the same. You know, just
can a game warden come out there and look on your property for bait? So here's the thing. That's a tricky term too. Bait or feeding. Now some counties in Minnesota you can't feed. But if I'm feeding deer on my land, when does it constitute bait? Only when I'm hunting over it. So if I don't buy a deer license and I don't hunt deer and I'm busy with my customers all fall and I don't care if I shoot a deer and I don't buy a license and nobody is hunting on my land, can I feed right through deer season? If it's legal in my county?
I would think so.
I can feed right through deer season and there's nobody hunting.
Yep.
Bait is constituted, it only becomes bait when you start hunting over it.
Well, and me and Dylan talked about the rules about hunting within the vicinity of bait. And the argument was, what's the vicinity? Mm-hmm. What is the general space in which, I mean,
right.
A deer has to walk 200 yards to get to the bait pile, and you're hunting 300 yards from them. Are you within the vicinity? Like, that's the argument. Is what this vague.
Right.
Yeah. The current regulations say you cannot hunt where bait is placed.
Right. So
where?
But the thing is what we got to ask ourselves is, A, is feeding deer spreading CWD? No. Is not feeding deer causing to have more winter deaths and making it easier for wolves? Right now, the deer are running through the woods, sinking through the layer of crust. It got above 32 degrees. You said you got another 12 inches the other day. How much snow do you got in Wisconsin?
50 inches?
So your deer are going to suffer, and they're sinking.
The trail camera photos, and we'll post them on 10 Point. It's past their belly. It's to their shoulders. I mean. They're
just sinking,
and the trail.
And the wolves open up their foot wide, and they walk right on top. They just walk along and eat whatever they want.
And they're half the weight.
Right. Yep. So the wolves have a big snowshoe. They can walk on top. The deer are breaking through. It's a bad deal. So the question is, well, we don't want deer to spread CWD because, you know, we've had 193 of them, you know, that were tested positive. None of them died, but they were tested positive. So we can't feed deer, so we're going to let them all starve. I had a guy post on my comment the other day, and he says, wild deer were made to survive the winter. They don't need feed. I argue that's just the biggest bunch of nonsense I've ever seen in my life. Wild deer, 30 below, 2 feet of snow, guess what? They need feed. They need something good. That's all there is to it, or it's going to be bad. So your question is, can a game warden go out there and look for, and I'm gonna say that I would do everything in my power to prevent it, and they know if they got caught on my land by me, I would raise heck with them. I don't think they want to, but there's certain people that are like, well, what's he gonna do? I'm gonna go look anyway. And there's been case law in the past where, you know, I don't know what state it was, where some troopers had reason to believe somebody had a grow operation in with their corn, and they drove down a road, and there was a no trespassing sign on each side, and they opened up the gate, and they drove through the gate, and they went out and walked through the corn, and they found the marijuana grow operation, and it was a righteous search. It was open field. And the state made a big deal out of, well, they had no hunting signs. And the courts interpret no hunting signs sometimes as, and different courts will give you different results, but I've had it happen. They'll say, I'm not going to interpret your no hunting signs as a request to stay off your land to fulfill the requirements in the 609 code.
So no trespassing signs would.
No trespassing signs were not interpreted as a request to stay off to meet the requirements in the 609 code. So I'm just saying open field is a different deal, right? It's a different deal. The curtilage, your dwellings, your outbuildings, you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, as we explained, okay? And so, but if you find a game warden on your land and you walk out there and you say, hey, I don't want you here. He says, well, I'm here. I think you're hunting. I'm not hunting. I'm wearing orange and I'm checking on my cows. Well, you got a gun in your pickup. I always have a gun in my pickup. I shoot coyotes. This is my farm truck. I got a gun in each tractor too. And they stay in there all year long. I don't want you in my... Well, I'm not leaving. Well, I'm calling the local sheriff. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, well, that's it. You're out of here. Well, I want to ask you some questions. And you ask, do you have the right to remain silent? I would ask the warden at that point. It would be real simple. Do I have the right to remain silent? He would have to say yes. Do I have the right to leave your presence? Are you arresting me?
Am I being detained?
And am I being detained? And if he says, yeah, you're being detained, I'd sit down on a rock and just sit there and wait for the sheriff. You know what I mean? I'm not going to get bullied and harassed by an overzealous officer. I'm not doing it.
That goes back to the warden that came up she parked on the road. She knew enough not to pull down my driveway with her vehicle. She parked on the road and walked up. And maybe she didn't think I was there. I'm not sure what her thought process was with that. She knew she shouldn't be on my land because she parked off the road, right in the middle of the road, and decided to walk up. Maybe she was going to check it out without me being there, or maybe she thought
Why didn't she drive right up and knock on your door? Why did she park down the road? Because she didn't want you to see her. She was going to go look before she spoke to you.
Yep. So
she was going to open your feeder up and look and poke around and then talk to you.
Yep.
And measure to see if you had 2.3 gallons instead of 2.
Start counting the kernels.
Yeah.
So I told her to get off. She did. She told me she was gonna look, and I said, I don't want you to get off. She walked back to her truck. I told her where she could go drive and see across 2 yards and see my feeder, which you can see the feeder, but there's no way you can tell the volume. Now, you bring up the drone, but how do you, in a drone, gauge the volume in which the corn is, right? I mean, you'd have to film me using a 5-gallon bucket. You'd have to film me.
Right. But again, let me be clear. I enforced laws for 29 and a half years. I am not encouraging you or Dylan or anyone to break the law.
No, neither are we.
And I'm not encouraging anybody to break the law. What I am encouraging them is to know your rights and don't be bullied.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And don't be talked into a ticket. Did you guys know that years ago I asked a game warden, okay, this is going to blow your mind, okay? The law has been changed. Now in Minnesota it says if you're something about, and I don't have it verbatim, but it says if you're going to or from your hunting land and you're in transit, you can have your gun unloaded and uncased. You don't need a case, okay? But prior to that, the law said that your gun must be cased, but it said you cannot transport a loaded or uncased firearm in a motor vehicle. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So it says, previous law said you cannot transport a loaded or so I go to sports shows and guys come up, they look at my deer in Minnesota and I say, oh, how's it going on, this and that, and they go, you worked in law enforcement. Question, I got a ticket from the game warden. Well, what happened? Well, I was muzzle loading and I was guilty. I mean, I had to pay a fine, but gee, now, it just really upset me. And I said, well, what happened? Well, I was sitting in my hayfield. I pulled in the crossing. I was sitting in my hayfield and I had my muzzle loader and, I reached down and I put a cap on my muzzle loader and I'm sitting there and it's snowing. I'm watching my hayfield and I had the heater running. And if a deer steps out, I was going to get out of the car and shoot him with the muzzle loader. He's a 65-year-old farmer. I heard that story 200 times throughout the course of me traveling. And I told each one of these guys, you didn't break the law. And they said, yeah, I did. I had my muzzle loader, my rifle loaded. I said, you didn't break the law. Read the law as if you've got a 5th grade reading level. And it says it is illegal to transport a loaded or uncased firearm. The definition of transport is moving from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. And if you're sitting in your vehicle and your vehicle's running and you're not moving, you didn't break the law. Okay? So, game warden comes in the office and I said, hey, I got a question for you. He goes, what? If I pull over on the side of the state highway and I sit there and I load my rifle to the max, I take the safety off, I put my rifle on the dash, it's on the defroster, and I sit there and semis are going by. I got a deer license in my pocket. My pickup's running, and I'm just sitting on the shoulder of the highway. I'm not on the highway, I'm on the grassy shoulder, and everybody drives by can see my rifle pointing towards the ditch on the dash and on the defroster. Have I broken any laws? He says, well, we don't want people to know that, but no, you haven't. So it's not illegal. It wasn't illegal until you put it in gear. So these guys were getting tickets for being in their hayfield, and they never even violated the law. But they went in and paid their fine, and the game warden got a click for, oh, I'm a good boy, I wrote a ticket. But he wrote a ticket that wasn't even against the law, and the guy paid it. It's just so much corruption. It's not. So I'm telling you and people listening, officers are supposed to enforce the law and understand the legislative intent. The word transport was put in there for a reason, but nowhere did it say you couldn't sit in your vehicle with a loaded gun and keep your gun dry and step out of the vehicle and shoot a deer in your hayfield. Right?
Right.
But they're not following the law. So I was at a sheriff's convention, and I had, all the sheriffs in the county are there, and I asked a question, and people thought I was crazy. But I asked the question, I said, when a person gets a permit to carry in Minnesota, permit to carry, can you have a loaded rifle in your car driving down the road? Does your permit to carry cover a rifle? And the sheriffs across the table from Ramsey and Hennepin and wherever else they were from said, I don't think so. And I said, I kind of think it does. And so we were at the conference, and then the attorney for the association stands up and talks. Someone asked the question, and they thought, well, we're going to embarrass that sheriff from Kitson County. He don't know what he's talking about. And the attorney said, hey, sheriffs, all of you in the room, this is a good question. My advice is you don't let your deputies write that ticket, because it's not clear. It's not crystal clear, and you're going to lose it, and you're going to make bad case law. So time goes on. I know the answer, and a trooper comes into our office, and he says, hey, if you got a permit to carry, does it transfer over to rifles in a motor vehicle being loaded going down the road? The trooper's asking me, and the deputy. And I said, why are you asking the question? Well, the game warden came up and asked me. And he didn't know, his office didn't know, so he asked me, a trooper, and now I'm asking you guys. And I said, our advice is don't write the ticket. Don't write the ticket, they're going to kick it loose. So years go by, young guy gets a hold of me, and he says, hey, I got a ticket, I had fuzzy dice hanging from my mirror, I got a permit to carry, I got pulled over by a trooper in Roseau, and she wrote me for having a loaded rifle in my car, because she saw the fuzzy dice. And I said, fight it, go to court. He goes to court, he sees the sheriff, and the sheriff asks him in Roseau County, what are you here for? I got a ticket for having a loaded rifle, but I got a permit to carry from you. The sheriff said, it's not illegal. Well, why does the sheriff say that? He was at the same sheriff's conference I was. He sat at the same table.
Yep.
And the sheriff goes back and talks to the judge, ticket dismissed. Hmm. So am I advising people to drive around with a loaded rifle? No. I'm advising people to know their rights.
Right.
Does that make sense? Know your rights. So again, we've covered a lot of ground. We probably reached our time limit, Dylan. We're getting close.
Yeah, right about.
So anybody listening, here's the deal. I would really enjoy switching up the format. Dylan, work on it. Kyle, live with questions. People can be mad at me. They can hate me for my views. But you know what? They're going to have the right to free speech.
Yeah.
And they can call up and say, we're going to ask that they don't swear at me.
you swear, we're just going to shut you off because we have a standard to uphold here to maintain our iTunes rating.
Right. So, but I think it would be a really good discussion. And since the DNR will never talk to me and they avoid me, let's just have a discussion. Let's just air things out. I have the right to free speech, and let's exercise free speech and expose some of this nonsense, and let's educate each other, and let's hear horror stories from each other in a live podcast format. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. So what I anticipate going forward is we're probably going to stick to the Fridays at 7 p.m. for our regularly scheduled programming, but maybe once or twice a month we'll have a special event where we can go live and have calls in. But I have to look into some technology to allow me to have more than one caller on the line on my cell phone, because then we just keep waiting for the phone to ring where we can get 4 or 5 lined up. But also Facebook comments, comments on a live Facebook video work as well. So we're going to have some options here. We're going to try to work some of this stuff out. So that's kind of what we're going to head towards, I think.
And again, I'm just going to recap. Hey, you guys, I'm giving you my best honest opinion. And I'm not telling you I'm right. Because laws change. They morph. Things twist and change and do whatever. You can always look the law up. You can always contact an attorney. You can always get a different interpretation. I'm just sharing experiences from my career.
Nothing on this podcast is supposed to be constituted as legal advice.
Right.
Just to cover our butts.
Right.
We have opinions. We have very strong opinions. And most of the time our opinions are correct. At least that's what I would say.
Right.
But, we're not lawyers, and laws change and things change. So
there we go.
There, we covered our butts. Anything you want to plug for this week, Kyle? Do you have any sneak peek of any guests we may have coming up?
I think we have a list of people for moving forward for the month of January and February, right?
I think so.
I think we got to nail down a couple days, but having a couple special guests from out of our realm of Minnesota and Wisconsin. It'll be interesting to see how their deer management and their laws and their baiting regs and how that stuff all kind of constitutes NCWD too.
Yeah.
And see how their relationships with the DNR and managing organizations. I think I want to kind of grill them on how they have to deal with it out of our states, and see how we can implement or reflect on some of that stuff. So late January and February are going to be fun, I think.
I think so, and I think we didn't do it this time, but next time we're getting guests on, I think we gotta do better about, hey, this is a guest we're having, any questions for that particular guest, and pushing their Facebook and stuff a little bit too. But
Yep.
New year, new us, a lot of stuff going on, so we're gonna get some things ironed out. And I think we're ready to end here. If everybody's good. Any closing statements?
Nope, sounds good.
All right. Well, you can find Lessons of the Woods by 10 Point Whitetails on Facebook or YouTube, which both pages are called 10 Point Whitetails. Or you can find us on your favorite podcast app, which includes Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts. We've had a huge hit on Audible lately, which is cool. So yeah, you can find us where you found us. If you got anything you want to talk to us about, send us an email at 10pointwhitetails@gmail.com. And that's 10pointwhitetails@gmail.com. And we'll see you guys next week, Friday at 7 p.m. And follow our Facebook page for the live video updates that we're going to try to implement here in the near future. So, see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening.